Hello, future content theorists, and welcome to this month's lightning lesson. Before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping items. First, I love doing these things live because I don't believe content should feel like a passive experience. That said, please feel free to turn your cameras on. Let's keep this like an interactive workshop that I normally teach in my content theory cohort. And use Zoom's hand raise feature if you have a question arise, and we'll bring you on camera, we'll bring you on screen. Also, I'm going to be throwing a lot at you today, so I've built in some discussion points where I can clarify any of the concepts before we move on to the next topic. Second, yes, we will have a recording. It will be available, and we will send it out with AI-enhanced notes. I use a tool called Cast Magic, which will give you access to the replay, the transcript, notes, and a ChatGPT-like feature. So if you want to interact with the content further than that and expand more on the concepts, you can definitely do that. Third, we're all marketers here. So yes, I do want to sell you something. I'm not going to, lie about that because that's what we're here for, right? I host a week-long cohort-based program called Content Theory, where we explore the science, philosophy, and psychology of what creates category-defining content programs. We can talk about that after the lightning lesson, if you want to talk about what that program entails. And finally, everything we're talking about here today has been incorporated into the workshop itself, which means after the presentation, I challenge you to watch it again and see how I've used these concepts and techniques, and you decide for yourself how effective they are. All right, everyone. Give me a thumbs up if you're ready to get started. Perfect. Okay, let me just share my screen here. Boom. So name of the game today is how to edit B2B content like a TV screenwriter. Before we get into that, though, I want to ask you a question. I want you to imagine for a second how much work it takes to get a single visitor to your site, right? They have to find you through busy social media feeds, be found in a search engine that seems to actively hate the websites it's trying to be ranking, or earn an open and then a click in an incredibly flooded inbox. And not to mention when you're competing with texts, app notifications, bosses, spouses, children's, and cat videos, and finally, work. Right? Now, imagine after all that work, after everything your content has gone through to reach a visitor's eyes, that they leave almost immediately without reading, watching, or listening. Happens. I've seen this chart before, this heat map before, and it was very, very depressing the first time I saw it. This is serious because according to multiple sources, anywhere between 40 to 60% of content marketing budgets are wasted on ineffective content. I'm curious, and I would love for you to put this in the chat right now. How would you define ineffective content, right? It's a fairly broad term. So how would you define it? Put that in the chat if you would like. Now, I had a hard time finding more recent figures, but according to HubSpot survey back in 2022, the majority of content marketers said that their quarterly content budget hovered between $40,000 to $80,000. These are mostly in-house folks. But if we say that just 50% of that content marketing budget is being wasted, that's anywhere between $80,000 to $160,000 a year, right? So it's no wonder that why, according to my own research with the State of Discontent report, the majority of leadership teams are only mostly bought into content marketing programs. And anecdotally speaking, why content marketing is often viewed as a cost center, not a revenue generator. Of course, this becomes a demoralizing process for practitioners who are constantly feeling like their work is being devalued, because instead of being seen as business crucial strategic partners, we're seen as order takers and service providers. All right, let's see what you said about content being ineffective. What do we have here? All right, pull that up in the chat. Yeah, ineffective content. Let's see. Ineffective content, not converting, content no one wants to read or share, isn't insightful to the reader or watcher. Right, okay. Content that fails to engage. Cool. So, I think ineffective content boils down to these four things, right? Doesn't result in repeat visitors, doesn't result in signups, doesn't result in private sharing, and doesn't result in video or visitors exploring the brand further. While leadership teams might be looking at top line metrics like traffic or maybe even conversions, what we should be thinking about are these numbers, because these are the indicators that get people that are showing us whether people are actually engaged or not. And when we focus on these metrics, right, we're going to shorten sales cycles. I've seen this. I've been able to double, or when I've been able to double the amount of page views per, or pages viewed per session, and then sessions per time period. Right, when I doubled those, I was able to cut the time in sale in half when I was at QuickBooks. This is a really cool concept, because I was like, how do we create internal links that are worth clicking on a sentence level basis? Right, very small thing that had a very huge result, because we got people visiting more sites or more pages. We can increase marketing to revenue attribution. Right, we can see how many more touch points a person has throughout the course of their journey, and because of that, we're able to say, okay, how do we get people opening 15 tabs by the time they're done with this, right? By the time they're done with the session, and get them returning. We can make our content work harder by getting more shares in public and private channels. So one of my axioms of content marketing is decisions are made in Slack. If we're putting our content in the middle of a conversation, we're far more likely to be part of that consideration phase. And that's one of the things that I really try to stress is, can we get our content shared in Slack channels? And can we get our content shared in internal newsletters, especially if you're working with mid-market B2B companies like a lot of folks I know here do. And we can also increase our revenue by a significant margin. If we're shortening the time to sale, and we're able to get more people buying products, which means we're increasing our revenue, right? Pretty straightforward. And the thing is, if you take a step back, right, many of these are the same exact types of metrics that are relevant to the TV and film industry, right? When people don't return enough to a TV show, it gets canceled. When the superfans don't follow the updates to get every production detail, or they don't tell their friends and family, it does not grow by word of mouth. If people aren't engaging further with the IP, there are no additional merchandising opportunities. And given the amount of monthly subscription services and licensed products out there, I submit to you that TV and film today exists primarily as a form of content marketing to keep you spending money month after month and on products after products. Now, fortunately, mainstream film and TV also have a shared DNA in how they're written, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to show you how that works. Who am I? Why am I qualified to talk about this? I am Tommy Walker. I'm the founder of the Content Studio, and I work with Fortune 1000 companies and high-growth B2B SaaS startups to create category-defining contents using the methods I teach in my program, Content Theory. And today, I am going to ruin TV shows and movies for you forever. You're never going to look at it the same way again. By the time we're done, you will never look at content the same way again, and you will have the tools and language necessary to be an incredibly effective B2B storyteller. I just found out in the last minute here that some of my slides have some wonky formatting things that just came up. So if that happens, please forgive me, and we'll make sure we muscle through it. So these are the things we're going to be talking about today. Now, these, in combination with everything I talked about in my previous lightning lessons on intros and building a narrative content calendar, which, by the way, thank you for sharing that in the chat already, are the primary building blocks of what get people hooked on content. If you've ever found yourself going down the rabbit hole of an IP, a big part of it is because they have skillfully executed on these elements, and these elements specifically, right? Conversely, it does not matter if it's a blog, a book, a podcast, a video, or a course. When any of these elements are missing, or the writer has made weak choices on any of these, you as the customer or consumer can feel something is off, even when you can't quite put your finger on it. Mastering these concepts is the difference between someone leaving, never to be heard from again, and opening 15 tabs, following you on every single channel so they never miss a thing. To demonstrate these concepts, right? We talked about this in the promotion of this. I'm going to be using one of the plot lines from Breaking Bad because it is a masterclass in how these writing techniques work. And Vince Gilligan and his writing team are absolutely brilliant, and it's why Breaking Bad is widely considered one of the best TV shows of all time. And what we're going to do is show you how something very small can turn into something very, very big. So consider that your spoiler warnings. Anyone here, by the way, like Breaking Bad fans? Like, raise your hand. I can see you in the chat here. Yeah, we got some fans in the room. Okay, cool. So I want to make sure that not everything's going to be completely foreign to this. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about here is setups and payoffs. You can't talk about setups and payoffs without talking about Chekhov's gun. This is a concept that comes from a famous playwright, Anton Chekhov. He says, remove everything that has no relevance to the story. If you say in the first chapter there is a rifle hanging on the wall, in the second or third chapter, it absolutely must go off. If it's not going to be fired, it should not be hanging there. Now, this seems like a pretty straightforward concept, but tell me, really, honestly, how many times have you read a headline that offered strategies but only gave tips, or read a how-to that was actually a why, right? Or see something that was put into the introduction but was never revisited again? That creates a false promise. So I once edited an article that opened with something to the effect of, with all, and tell me if you've seen this one. I'm like watching the chat here. Tell me if you've seen this before. With all of the AI tools available now, video repurposing is easier than ever. We've asked 2 different creators to share their workflow and see how they're saving time and money and getting more reach by turning long form videos into smaller, bite-sized shareable content. How many people here have seen that article before? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So later in the post, the first thing one of the creators they were interviewing said was, I handed over to my assistant. Which is like, how is that saving me time or money or anything? Right. That there's this disconnect. If the setup's not right and the payoff's not there, then there's this huge disconnect. And that's the thing that gets readers to disengage with a piece of content. And likewise, how many times have you seen something come out of left field that didn't have any setup at all? Right? I've edited thousands of pieces of content, including articles, videos, and audio, and I can't tell you just how common it is for a kind of solution to be introduced 3/4 of the way down without any introduction whatsoever. As a reader, a viewer, or a listener, when something isn't set up properly, I don't know what's supposed to be important. And if it isn't paid off, I don't know why that thing was supposed to be relevant in the first place. I'm just kind of left sitting there going, why? Okay. Right. Okay. Um, but when the setups and payoffs are skillfully executed, they can become some of the most memorable parts of the story. So we're going to look at the opening scene of season 4 of Breaking Bad. Now, if you're not familiar with Breaking Bad, I'll give you some of the context leading up to this scene. Walter White is a high school chemistry teacher who enters the drug trade under the pseudonym Heisenberg after getting diagnosed with terminal cancer. He and his former student Jesse Pinkman cook the world's most pure crystal meth together. And in the season before this clip, they started working with a high-level distributor named Gus Fring, who is paying Walt millions of dollars to run a super lab to produce hundreds of pounds of meth each week. Now, to put it lightly, Walt and Jesse didn't agree with some of Gus's business practices, and the relationship goes south. Jesse goes into hiding, and Gus wants to kill Walt. But because Walt's meth is the best in the world, Gus unfortunately still has to work with him. Gus installs good-natured Gail Bedecker to another highly trained chemist as Walt's lab assistant so he can learn Walt's formula and so Gus can eventually kill Walt. During the season 3 finale, it looks like Gus is going to get his way, but in a surprise turn of event, Walt gets Jesse to go to Gail's apartment and shoots him in the face. This scene, right? So that's all the lead up to this scene, the opening of season 4. It is a flashback to when Gus and Gail started setting up the lab before Walt was ever in the picture. All right. Thumbs up, everyone can hear this okay?
How's it coming?
Very, very well. It's a flurry of deliveries. Feels like Christmas morning. It's exciting. It's really coming together.
When do you think we'll be up and running?
2 weeks.
Good. Very good.
By the way, that sample you asked me to run, I ran it, and it is quite good.
Thank you very much, Gail. You can give that to Victor to discard.
Sure.
Okay. Now, fans of the show will know that that box cutter becomes important later in the episode, right? But there was another setup at first glance that would have been very easy to miss. Did you catch it? Put it in the chat if you catch that, if you caught it. All right. I'm going to keep moving here. It was Gail's notebook. During the very last scene, Gail's apartment becomes an active crime scene, referencing back to the thing that happened at the end of the previous season. And throughout that crime scene, the camera pans around while some police are questioning witnesses and others are taking photos. It pans and lands on Gail's notebook at the very end. Okay. I'm going to take a step back for here for a second. What is the point of an introduction? Right? We can't talk about good content. We're not talking about how it's introduced. Now, Google says that the point of an introduction is to grab the reader's attention, pique their curiosity about the topic, and set the stage by clearly outlining the main idea and providing the reason for them to continue reading. Essentially, it acts as a hook to draw the reader in and establish expectations for the content to come. It's not bad. But I think it can be a lot more specific. I say the point of an introduction is to introduce the competing values, philosophical conflict, and what antagonizes the reader and sets up the stakes to what is to be gained or lost by engaging or not engaging with the content. Okay. I prefer this definition because it puts the power back in your hands to make intentional choices rather than rely on a reader's reaction, which you'll never see and have zero control over. One of the things I really dislike about certain ways briefs are approached is, what do you want the reader to know, think, and feel? You can't decide what somebody is going to feel any more than you know what they're going to have for breakfast. But you can make really strong choices in your setups and payoffs that will maybe evoke that feeling. You have to be the person making the choice, and I don't rely on what the audience is going to feel because I can't decide that. Right? I want to make strong choices that maybe will evoke that, but it's really up to me. So we're going to give a real world example here, right? This is from a company called Litmus, an email marketing platform that helps users create, test, and analyze emails. It also helps users personalize emails and monitor the brand's reputation. So I'm going to read this just so we have the same pacing here. The Litmus team is constantly abuzz discussing new ideas or email marketing ideas and predictions. Trends like interactive emails will shape the industry in the next 12 months. We'll spend more time perfecting lifecycle, email marketing strategies, and data management while leaving room to experiment with the latest personalization and automation techniques. Marketers will aim for goals like increased engagement and retention through the customer journey. Of course, we can't forget about the AI in the room. AI tools will continue to help marketing teams reduce time spent on repetitive tasks, but they also might shake up your strategies. In this article, we broke down what marketers should focus on in the inbox this year. Who's ready to plan your best email year yet? Let's go. Okay, this is one of those weird formatting issues that just showed up. This is my rewrite. Now, I'm going to start by saying that I think the original works just fine, and something we'll talk about a little bit later is when that other intro might work better. What I'm trying to do with this, though, is add in some elements that I think can serve as setups and give the reader something to anticipate before getting into the meat of the piece. So here we go. The Litmus team is constantly abuzz with ideas about where email marketing is headed next. Personalization is getting sharper, automation is getting faster, AI is taking on tasks once reserved for copywriters and designers. Some marketers, like Cynthia, see this as an opportunity: faster workflows, better targeting, and more efficiency. Others, like Jeremiah, see a risk over-engineered campaigns, lost creativity, and an inbox that feels increasingly robotic. The challenge ahead isn't just about adopting new tools, it's about marketers making them work without losing their soul in the process. For years, great email marketing relied on instinct, experience, and time-tested strategies. Now, familiar topics don't always land in the way they used to. Segmentation and lifecycle emails have long been pillars of strong campaigns, but as automation expands, their role is evolving. Marketers will need to rethink how they use these strategies to bridge the gap between tradition and innovation. It isn't about keeping up, it's about redefining how brands connect with people. Data is becoming the foundation of personalization, while accessibility is shaping how trends or how brands reach every subscriber. The next 12 months will determine who adapts and who gets left behind. And what you can't see here is these are the trends that are shaping the future. Again, this isn't the best, I will admit that, and there are things that I would definitely cut on a rewrite, but I'm setting up a bunch of different things. In fact, there are 10 different setups I'm doing right here. Right. Now, this isn't exhaustive, but these are the different kinds of setups you have at your disposal. These are the ones that I've used in this introduction. So we've got the topic setup, the character introduction, the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, paradigm shifts, stake elevations, character growth, false dichotomy, reframing the problem, thematic setup, and ending with an open loop. Right. So here I've highlighted all of these. These are the topics that we're going to be talking about in the post. We've done an introduction for the characters that we're going to have throughout here. So I wanted to create the setup where we have the Litmus team is constantly abuzz with ideas. We now introduce Cynthia and Jeremiah. I made these two up. These create instant payoffs to the mention of the Litmus team. We can ground the team with real people. Second, in many cases, payoffs can and should serve as new setups that will be paid off later in the piece. For example, by setting these two up now, it won't be a surprise when we introduce quotes from them later. And then third, they create a dramatic tension. Right. If you saw my last lightning lesson on intros, they are the physical embodiment of two of the competing values that control this post. Their perspectives add weight to the philosophical conflict that we'll set up later in the intro. And they also, when we talk about the power of choice later, gives you an actual person to side with rather than a concept. And then fourth, and this is for any content theory alumni who were in attendance, this is one of those micro decisions you can make on a topic level that aligns with the culture narrative. When you sustain this through multiple posts, you can humanize the company like we talked about in the course. I'm going to take some water. All right. I realize we're already about a half an hour in, and there's a lot of ground to cover here. So if you can stay over, that would be fantastic. If you can't, we'll make sure you catch up in the replay. Okay. Next kind of setup that we have here is the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, which uses these lines to show the opposing side, setting up the dramatic question, which we'll talk about again later, and hints at the idea that we'll find some kind of middle ground, the synthesis. We're also elevating the stakes in the intro by showing what's to be gained or lost this year on how email is evolving. We're setting up the idea that things are no longer going to be done the same way, and we're moving into a new era. I'm also trying to challenge the reader with the idea that they're going to have to expand their thinking. And even though we've already set up the two opposing values as of tradition versus progress, and have hinted that there will be a hybrid approach, we're also saying that looking through it through the lens of tradition versus progress is a false dichotomy. So what we're saying here to the reader is that they're going to need to rethink these strategies, and we're not saying right now, and we're not saying how right now, which is why this setup is for something that's going to come later in the piece. And this is pretty straightforward. We are setting up the idea that we're reframing the problem, so we'll continue to do this throughout the piece. These are all the elements that establish the overall theme of the post. And then right here, instead of using the old standby, let's dive in, we create an open loop that I think almost challenges the reader to explore on their own rather than enthusiastically grab them by the wrist so you can show them around, if that makes sense. Right. So here's how we're going to pay these off. This is the original, right? So, hey, first name is 2018. Subscribers have seen basic personalization a million times, and marketers need to step up. You know what? I'm going to just give me a thumbs up when you're done reading. Good. Thank you, Gail. Cool, cool. All right. So the thing about this, right, is that I feel like there are fewer payoffs overall, right? If we compare it to the original intro, this version doesn't really have many payoffs. It's just giving the information beyond, and not further beyond what was originally set up. This version explains dynamic content rather than actively resolving any tensions like automation versus creativity or human connection versus AI, right? The other thing that it does is it doesn't have any stakes elevation. So it doesn't really emphasize what's at risk if marketers fail to adapt, right? So here's my rewrite, and these are the different payoffs that I have, and you can see everything's color coded. Hey, first, name is 2018, right? Automation makes email smarter, but when done poorly, it strips away what makes the marketing feel human. So we're already going back to those competing values that we were talking about in the introduction, right? Dynamic content is the difference between email that feels tailored and email that feels engineered. The challenge isn't just inserting a subscriber's name, it's creating a real connection, not a machine's best guess. This is where real-time content comes in. Elements like live polls, progress bars, countdown timers, and social feeds don't just adjust to the recipient, they create interaction, keeping engagement personal rather than predictable. Brands have seen a serious boost from dynamic content too, right? So Kate Spade, P&O Ferris, and Litmus Personalized users have all seen big increases. I'm bringing Cynthia back in here too, right? So we have another payoff on what Cynthia was talking about. Litmus Personalized makes it easy to build hyper-personalized emails that actually grab attention and feel more human. If you're not sure where to start, we've got you covered. Check out our free email templates with Litmus tested, live tested elements to help you get going. Not sure where to start? We have free email templates with Litmus tested live elements. I should have changed that one up. But I think this one feels a little bit stronger because it escalates the stakes by pointing out what's at risk, right? Automation can strip away human connection, but it gives marketers reason to care beyond just about learning about the dynamic content. It also, on the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, right? This structure sets up a clear problem and resolves it, mirroring the broader automation versus human creativity debate introduced in the intro. It also does the false dichotomy reconciliation, right? It explicitly addresses the false dichotomy. It's not about choosing between automation and personalization. It's about using automation to create a human connection. And then we have stakes-driven proof too, right? So now even though the case study lines here are still mentioned, we're not just saying that these are things that happen. Now we're saying if you're adjusting to where the future is headed with these other payoffs, now these case studies are directly connected to the problem being solved, proving that balancing automation and personalization leads to business results. Does that make sense? Are we all on the same page here? All right, cool. So here's another one of the original pieces, right? One of the things that I found interesting about this is that the opening line of this article was, "We at the Litmus team are abuzz with ideas about what's happening in the future," right? Or something along those lines. But the first quote that shows up in here is not somebody from the Litmus team, right? So we have a false setup, right? So in my rewrite of this, we're going to create stronger payoffs for what was set up in the introduction. Right? You need a dedicated email designer. Customers form bonds with brands through thoughtful design and storytelling, and an email designer who cares about the craft will do what AI can't: care, adapt, and improvise. Best email design isn't a choice between technology and creativity. It's about knowing how to blend them. Right? So the other thing, right? The first version acknowledges that automation is important, but it doesn't clearly articulate how brands should balance the automation versus creativity. And that chess versus checkers metaphor is pretty vague, right? It implies a need for strategic thinking, but it doesn't tie back to the traditional versus progressive debate that was introduced earlier. This second version, it directly resolves the false choice between automation and craftsmanship, right? The best email design isn't a choice between technology and creativity. It's about knowing how to blend them. That's how it does it. The first version also frames the problem as a technical one, investing in design and automation tools, but it lacks a strong emotional reframe. So it feels more like a recommendation for efficiency rather than reframing what email marketing should truly be about, which is connection, not just execution. This one also reframes the problem from a technical challenge to a human one, right? With the customer's form bonds line. And it also directly ties the intros, redefining how brands connect message, positioning email as an experience, not just as an operational task. It also has a rhetorical question in here, right? So what emails do you remember? Reinforces that mindset shift. It forces readers to reconsider their own experiences as a consumer, making the problem feel more personal because the original intro didn't set up a strong philosophical conflict. The original section didn't have anything to pay off. This is a payoff to that. So there are a number of other things here. But so, like, for example, the previous one, the Drew Price quote gestures towards a mindset shift, but it didn't reflect any actual conflict or debate. And when we introduce Jeremiah's quote, not only are we bringing back somebody from the Litmus team, but it fully engages with the philosophical conflict, right? It also directly addresses the intro's automation versus authenticity. We also have the addition of an example. Look at your own inbox. So it makes everything more relatable to the reader. Does this make sense? Are you with me on this? Do you feel the same thing? You feeling this? Okay. So, and then I think the first one lacked a little bit of urgency, so it felt like a generic call to action to invest in tools rather than an argument for why it's crucial to act now. Right. So this one has a little bit more urgency versus consequence, etc. Right? There's a lot here. Now, what I think here, right? This is why it's important to know your audience, and something we teach in the first day of content theory is an 8-layer market research process. One of them is incredibly important in the way that you talk to your customers and how you extract the information about what their common shared DNA is, because what we want to do, right, is really figure out, like, this is going to work differently for different types of readers, right? So version 1 was actually not that bad. Like I said, if the audience is a senior decision maker, they need clear data-backed recommendations rather than philosophical insights, which is what this rewrite more leans into. If the goal is to focus on investment and system building rather than creative craftsmanship, and if the piece is meant to feel more authoritative and direct rather than conversational and reflective, right? It's also, if it's part of a thought leadership or strategy document where high-level insights matter more than storytelling engagement, right? That's the reason why number 1 would work better over number 2. But if the goal, we want to use version 2 over version 1, if our reader is more of a practitioner, right? When the goal is to create an emotional connection, version 2 makes more sense and makes the reader reflect on their own inbox, rather than just look at things, rather than just have the information presented to them, right? It also, if the audience is brand marketers, designers, or creative, I feel like version 2 speaks more directly to that creative professional who cares more about storytelling, design, and authenticity. And it also frames email marketing more as an artistic craft rather than just an operational process, right? So this is incredibly important to know the reader, because how the whole conversation is framed, what setups you use and what payoffs you use are going to be the entire thing, right? That's everything. That's everything to the piece. If you're setting things up the wrong way or in a way that the reader doesn't care about, then the payoffs aren't going to matter. But if you have methods of really knowing what that reader cares about, when you start looking at these dichotomies of what your competing values of a piece are, you know where your reader sits on one side of the argument or the other, and that's incredibly important. All right, let's discuss. I've been talking at you for a little while now. less success. If I have to pick on folks, I will. I can see certain people. I can see your faces, which is great because I can kind of see whose wheels are turning here. So yeah, go ahead and raise your hand if you want to chat, or I'll pick on you. Either way. All right. Let's see. Chad, I'm going to pick on you because I can see you and I see your wheels turning quite a bit here. I'd love to hear from you any sort of questions that you might have about this or anything you want to discuss as you've been looking at it.
Well, right now I'm just kind of really kind of letting all this information absorb.
Mhm.
But I can definitely see how the proper setup and not only that, but especially knowing your audience would make a big difference as far as how you direct your messaging, especially in like blogs, emails, that type of thing.
Mhm.
So I don't really have a good example right now as far as like how I'd actually work it into the content that I'm creating, but it does give me a lot of fodder to think about, and
Yeah.
I'm definitely excited. This is a really kind of a unique approach, and it helps me um, see how it could be very valuable in positioning the messaging that I'm trying to get out to our audience.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, the thing that I didn't mention in here too, and I hate the cliche of know your audience because that's almost like how everybody frames it, right? Like of course you got to know your audience, but we did something called the State of Discontent report, which if you haven't read that, I will link it out also in the follow-ups here. It was 40.3%, I believe, of people who took the survey said they did not do their audience research nearly enough. Which tells me that that becomes very difficult to create defensible strategies, but also just how to position that communication overall. And then the three top challenges we had with uh, the non-production issues was creating quality content, knowing the right content for our audience, and knowing where the customer discovers content. So like these things, when I talk about creating a signal, right? When we want to stand out in any feed that we're standing in or that we're paying attention to or getting people just going further down the page, this is what that's about, right? The other thing that I didn't mention here that I plan on mentioning a little bit later um, is that not all setups have to be paid off. In fact, it's better if not all setups are paid off in the same piece, right? If you can create a setup that can only be paid off by going on to another article, like that's fantastic because that's your way to get somebody further into the website and consuming more pages. And you do that over and over and over again. And now suddenly, and I guarantee you, you've all had websites that you've felt this with, right? That's how we get endeared to, like, for me, it was Copyblogger in the very early days of content marketing, where I was like, oh, I got to read more. I got to read more. It's because they were creating setups that could only be paid off by reading another piece, right? That happens with YouTube channels all the time too, right? A lot of YouTube channels, it's not just a generic call to action of like, hey, watch this thing. It's also like, hey, if you want to learn more about these camera things, you got to go over here because I'm moving on in this part of the conversation, right? And then it's like, okay, yeah, no, I want to keep going. I want to keep going. That's what setups and payoffs are really powerful with. And that's one of the things that, if you're familiar with what happened with the Google leaks last year, was one of those things that kind of showed up as a signal. Somebody reading multiple pages on a site, that's like an indicator of quality. Robots can't tell what quality is, but they can tell all of these engagement metrics. And Google has like 80% market share, and everybody's got analytics. So it's not like they don't have this information. So that's why setups and payoffs, I think, are incredibly important too, not just to keep people going down the page, but to keep people going further into the site and bring them in a rabbit hole. Okay. I'm going to keep moving. We are definitely going to go over. We're on slide 43 of 82. So if you have the time, cool. If you don't, I understand. But I'm going to keep plowing through, right? So I have a beef with the phrase buyer personas, right? I have a huge beef with the phrase buyer persona because I think it's very reductive to say something like Sally Sales Lady, right? And then here are the different attributes of Sally Sales Lady or Sally Sales Lady, because it doesn't really expose who she is. So if you follow my work, you'll know I'm a huge fan of Robert McKee, who's a screenwriting expert, right? Because one of the things he breaks down, because I think he breaks down the individual components of story so incredibly well. One of the things he talks about that has always resonated with me is the difference between characterization and character, right? And I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit, but he says, characterization is the sum of all observable qualities of human being, everything knowable through careful scrutiny: age, IQ, gender, sexuality, style, speech, gesture, choices of home, car and dress, education, occupation, personality, and nervosity, right? Values and attitudes, all aspects of humanity that we could know by taking notes on someone day in and day out. The totality of those traits is what makes each person unique, because each of us is a one-of-a-kind combination of genetic givens and accumulated experiences. This single assemblage of traits is characterization, but it is not character. True character is revealed in the choices a human being makes under pressure. The greater the pressure, the deeper the revelation, the truer the choice to the character's essential nature, right? One of the things, I've taken one of his workshops before. It's a like 3-day, 12 hours a day intensive. It's crazy. But he said, if there is a bus that is burning and there are 2 different colored children on the bus, which one do you save? That is character, right? When you're faced with a really difficult decision of this versus that, what do you do under pressure? Do you fold? Do you charge forward? Do you try to delegate to somebody else, right? That's character. My problem with buyer personas in content marketing is that it's all about characterization. So we get so caught up in demographics and surface level details like job titles, industries, and company sizes that we mistake these observations for true understanding. But just like in storytelling, our true nature isn't in our LinkedIn profile. It's the choices that we're going to make. And that's where the power of choice and who wins the scene comes in. So in screenwriting, the power of choice refers to how a character's choices shape the narrative, define their arc, and ultimately determine where the story's emotional impact. Choice defines the character. So what a character chooses in high-stake moments tells the audience who they really are, not just who they claim to be. Choices also drive the plot forward. So every scene should be shaped by the character's decisions rather than passive circumstances, and escalating choices create tension. So as a story progresses, choices should become harder and harder, forcing your protagonist into moral dilemmas. Now, granted, this is talking about screenwriting, but these are very, very true life. This is why it's in screenwriting, because screenwriting is always trying to capture truth with a capital T, right? That's why these things can really reflect with us or really resonate with us, because we can see ourselves in some of the choices that we might make in those same circumstances. We also have choice versus circumstance, right? Compelling story ensures that the character isn't just reacting to external forces, but they're actively making decisions that influence their fate, right? So next up, one of the things I asked when I was talking about doing this presentation on LinkedIn was, what types of things would you like to see? And The Matrix was the second most voted, so I'm going to bring this up. Tell me if this sounds right to you. Most marketing content I read doesn't give me, the reader, any choices. There's no moments to reflect, no time to buy into what's being said. It's just this relentless push forward as if information alone is going to be the thing that persuades me, right? Does that sound right to you? Everybody? Yeah? Okay. It's like if in this iconic scene, right? This is the red pill, blue pill scene. If Morpheus only told Neo just enough information about the Matrix, then gave him only one option. So this is if Morpheus were a content marketer.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. You are a slave, Neo.
You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland.
as content marketers, we've gotten real comfortable on relaying information. But the unfortunate truth is, and I know that we're all feeling this now, AI relays information faster, more efficiently, and for $20 a month. It's the existential problem that most of us have because a good portion and practitioners of our industry, because are relaying information, not making meaning of it, not giving choices. And because many leaders aren't able to feel the difference between AI and human-generated content, that's why it becomes a problem. But here's where great storytelling teaches us. Meaning is created through choice, and without choice, there is no investment. Without investment, there is no change, and without change, there is no story, right? So here's that same scene, but now with Neo's choices edited back in.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back.
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Follow me.
Do you see how much more powerful that is when Neo has choices in that scene? Right? I know all of us have seen the scene before, right? Or I'm going to guess that everybody's seen The Matrix before. But that makes such a huge difference in him having choices. So I don't know if you were paying attention, and I should have asked you beforehand, how many choices do you see being made in that one scene? Right? If you had to guess, red pill, blue pill is like the most obvious, but there are a bunch of others. All right. I count 12. Right? So Morpheus asking Neo if he wants to know what the Matrix is, Neo agreeing, Morpheus telling him, Neo continuing to listen because there's a bunch of stuff. It's, when you do your taxes, when you go to church, like at any point there, Neo could have said like, what are you talking about? And just stood up and left, right? And then, because it sounds insane, right? So Neo continuing to listen, Neo continuing to ask, or asking what truth, Morpheus continuing of the story, offering the blue pill, offering the red pill, Neo reaching for the red pill, Morpheus reminding him that this is the point of no return, Neo recommitting to the choice, and then Neo following Morpheus into the other room. Right? Without any of those choices, at any point, both of those characters could have made a different choice, and then the scene would have been completely different. Right? And what you might not know is that in a typical 120-page screenplay or a 13-episode TV show, protagonists make anywhere between 5 to 8 story-turning choices. These are the capital P plot choices. These act as the scaffolding for the story and come out at key areas of the structure and guide the entire direction of the narrative. And you can see here, I've got the traditional 3-act structure here. The inciting incident, the first key decision, end of Act 1. These are all where key choices are typically made in the 3-act structure, right? 3-act structure is not the only structure that exists within storytelling, not by a long shot. That's a whole different conversation. But when you analyze movies and when you analyze TV shows, you'll see that this is typically the case, right? And this is why I said I'm going to ruin movies for you for forever, because now you'll start to see it with everything that you look at. For example, if you watch The Matrix and you're looking out for these, there are only 7 major plot choices. Only 7, right? Follow the White Rabbit. Neo agrees to meet Morpheus. Red pill or blue pill. All right. Next one, train to become the one, rescue Morpheus, and fight Smith. That's it. Those are the only choices that are made. And these are the major choices that the protagonist makes that turn the story in new directions, right? These are the different kinds of capital P plot choices that force the characters to also make big decisions. So some of those types of decisions, right? Do or die, strategic long game choices, moral dilemmas, desperate choice when there are no good options. They're driven by feelings, they're sacrificial choices, or they're irreversible choices, or no turning back. These are the types of choices that we can also incorporate into our own content, not just on a piece-by-piece level, but on a larger scale level, right? A sacrificial choice, for example, if you want to buy this software, you might have to sacrifice these few things, but let me tell you why that's actually not a bad thing, right? If you're driven by feelings, right? If you're really tired, and tell me if you've seen this in any sort of content marketing or just marketing in general, you really tired of being frustrated by your current solution? This is why we're going to make you not frustrated. You have a moral dilemma, right? Lots of people right now are having trouble with Amazon and Walmart because of rollbacks that they've had on certain policies, right? Those are moral dilemma choices. So these choices are all things that people have made in an entire life. And this isn't just in any kind of storytelling, B2B or otherwise. Choices are important because when you recount the story of your life, you'll realize that every chapter was based on big choices. Did you call your crush? Did you take the job? Did you move to that city? Did you sign up for Content Theory? These are everything. Every single big moment came down to making a choice, right? Now, you may or may not agree with me, but I think one of the main things that B2B storytelling is missing is asking readers the big story turning points, these big turning point types of questions. Are you willing to coast on good enough content or push yourself to do better? Are you pushing your industry forward or following what everybody else is doing? What is the cost of not fixing the problem? Asking these kinds of questions at the right time after the proper setups, you get your readers, viewers, and listeners kicking off an unspoken second story where they start questioning their assumptions and thinking about things on a deeper level. And I know every single person in this room has had that with somebody, right? You've experienced this before, where you've not just been consuming the content itself, but there's like a whole nother thing that's happening. There's this whole extra layer. So we're going to go back. These aren't the only choices that happen in a story, though. There are other kinds of choices that are scene choices, which fill in the gaps between the plot choices. These are little p plot choices, right? Basically, anytime a character enters a scene, they come in with a want. This is something we talk about in content theory quite a bit. They come in with a want. One of those characters holds the power of choice and will use whatever means necessary they have at their disposal to sway the other character to get what they want, right? For example, in the 3rd episode of Breaking Bad Season 4, Walt's brother-in-law, Hank, starts the season depressed because he was suspended from the DEA after making a poor emotional choice to beat Jesse, and was shot several times by members of the cartel and mostly paralyzed, and now his recovery is slow and difficult. This is, for anybody who's a fan of the show, this is their minerals, Marie type phase, right? Anybody remember that? At this point of the story, too, he often chooses to do very little but snipe at his wife, Marie, who is trying her best to be supportive of him while he's recovering. And this is what he looks like at the beginning of this sequence, which is also a small collection of scenes. But shortly after being mean to his wife, his friend from the police department comes to visit. The first scene choice Hank makes is to allow Tim Roberts, the lead detective in Gail Bedeker's murder case, to enter the room, right? Now, Hank could have easily rejected him and not let him in because he wanted to be caught up in his depression, but Tim recently bailed Hank's wife out of jail, so he knows he owes him a favor. Tim wants to get Hank to look over his case files. Hank wants to be left alone. In this scene, Hank holds the choice.
Oh, well, can't complain, you know, every day a little better.
That's good. You're looking good.
Yeah, well, handsome was never the hard part. Come on in, grab a seat.
Yeah, just throw that stuff in.
Listen, thanks again for the other day, you know, this whole thing, it's been hard on her.
Forget it. Glad to help. So, rock collecting?
They're minerals, but yeah, it's cataloging, you know. Sort them, label them. It's actually a lot of work.
Yeah, no, it looks like it.
So, what's up?
Well, actually, I could use your help on something. Homicide, possibly drug-related.
You want my help on a case? What am I, Ironside?
No, but you're a drug cop who knows a local talent, and you're a pal I just did a favor for, so let me pick your brain a sec. You ever come across a guy by the name of Gail Bedeker?
Nope.
Someone came along and shot him in the face.
Okay.
No signs of forced entry, no signs of robbery.
Okay, so it's a crime of passion. Where's the drug angle?
We found a notebook at his place. I made a copy for you in case you're interested. Looks like it pertains to some kind of methamphetamine super lab.
Yeah.
It's filled with scientific formulas and chemical purchase lists, drawings, pages and pages of this stuff. It looks big time, but I'm no authority, so I wonder if you might take a look.
Come on, Tim, seriously. What is this, some sort of a charity thing?
I thought your expertise could be useful here.
I'm lying here like third base. Living from bowel movement to bowel movement. I'm not even useful to myself. Want my advice? You take this to Steve Gomez. He'll help you out.
I give this to Steve Gomez, and all of a sudden it becomes a DEA case. What good's that do me? If you could just take a look, tell me what I got here. I'd really appreciate it.
Okay. So there's another concept in screenwriting that applies to this, which is called who wins the scene. And that's exactly what it sounds like. When the scene is over, which character achieved their goal, and how does that affect what comes next in the story? Right? In this case, future theorists, who won the scene? Go ahead and type it in the chat. Or not. You can make a choice not to. That's fine. The idea of who wins the scene, right? Yeah, Tim wins the scene. And even though he chose to ignore the notebook earlier, right? Hank ultimately makes a capital P plot choice and chooses to read it at the end of the episode, which really kicks off his arc for the rest of the season.
I look at this image
So
that
here's
is
that
part
scene.
of the record. I am very concerned about what sort of distraction that could be, whether
Or
it's from
Hank
any
won the
sort of
scene.
signage,
Sorry.
but especially a signage that's changing every 5 seconds. Thank you.
Any other questions? We have a motion and a second on the floor to grant the appeal. All those in favor, raise your hand and say yes. Yes. There's 4 in the affirmative. Those opposed? There's 5 noes, and that motion fails.
I would like to make a motion to uphold the decision and the findings of the EPC and the loophole.
We have a motion and a second by Councilor Cook. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying yes to deny the appeal. To uphold the appeal. and hold the finding. Right, deny the appeal. All those in favor signify by saying yes. There's 5 in the affirmative. All those opposed say no. There's 4 in the negative. That passes.
So ultimately, in both of those sequences, Tim won the scene. Tim got what he wanted by giving Hank the notebook, and Hank ultimately reading it. Right, kicks off the arc for the rest of the show. If that didn't happen, if Tim never came in, if Hank never said "come on in," the show would have just stalled out. Right, the big things that came next wouldn't happen. So here's a sidebar. If you were at my lightning lesson back in December, you'll know that I'm a huge advocate for narrative content calendars because it gives the reader an overarching goal for the year, right? In this case, what we talked about was the super objective being to be viewed as a strategic leader, and their central conflict was the boss didn't understand content marketing, right? Because it gives that reader an overarching goal and a primary obstacle that's getting in their way, it allows creators to expand on the ideas while creating a through line for audiences to follow along, so they can either consume more of the backlog of content or subscribe so they don't miss out on what comes next. You'll also know that the narrative content calendar is broken up into the 4-act structure, which each act corresponds to a quarter, with each month leading to a sequence, with each with its own theme, with each sequence containing episodes, which are the individual pieces of content, and then with each episode having scenes, which, if we're talking about a blog post, are the individual subheaders. If you didn't happen to catch the lightning lesson, then I'm going to be dropping a link to that in the follow-up email, right? I bring it up because Hank's choice at the end of the 3rd episode comes at an act break. Him deciding to look at the notebook helps him regain his purpose and significantly turns the story. In content marketing, if we were following the narrative content calendar philosophy, act breaks could be placed at the end of the quarter and come in the form of lead magnets like webinars, email courses, ebooks, product launches, or something else that could be set up with your run the business content. What I think is great about this approach and why I try to follow it is that when we think about our readers' character development, which we'll talk about in April, this gives us the stuff to build off of. And depending on whatever that magnet is, the information that's contained in there is the ultimate payoff for paying attention to everything else. Now, for new audience members who weren't following along, they get a sense of missing something important, some important context. And for loyal audience members, they're being rewarded for following along when you're always giving people reasons to get caught up in your web of content, right? And for any content theory alumni in the room, this is one of those ways that you can pay off the sustained feedback loop that we talk about in day 4. All right, back to choices and Breaking Bad, right? So after Hank, in the very next episode, he starts to regain his sense of purpose. And this is what he looks like coming in next time we see him as he's welcoming Walt and his family over to dinner. He starts to talk to Walt. He's showing him these notes initially about Gail Bedecker. And one of the things that he shows him is this karaoke video that Gail has. And he believes could be Heisenberg, right? Later, while they're having dinner, the Whites reveal that they came into Walt might have a gambling problem to cover their tracks for the sudden amount of money that they've come into. And then Walt excuses himself to the restroom, but instead chooses to sneak into Hank's bedroom to look at the case files and see just how much Hank really knows. And this is where we'll pick up. This time, I'm going to put a counter and keep track of the choices that are being made.
Hey, whoa. Oh, sorry. I thought you might have fallen in there. No, just...
So Walt is choosing...
Hey, man, that was some big stuff back there.
Hank's choosing to...
No, we wanted to be thorough.
Topic.
Yeah, well, it's quite a tale. It couldn't have been easy to, talk about.
Walt is making the choice to stonewall and not...
Walt, if you can always bend my ear, right? I mean, if you ever need to talk or just blow off some steam, I'm here. Not going anywhere.
Offering to
Thanks,
listen.
Hank. Same goes for me, you know. If you ever want to bounce anything off me, I don't know, casework, anything, really. Sometimes just talking something through, you know, really can make a difference.
Walt is trying to learn
I mean,
more.
we're definitely not talking, you know, bathtub crank here. This is a big-ass operation. You know, hundreds of pounds a week, maybe more.
So, who is this person?
Walt
What do you
starts
know
to
about
probe.
him?
Well, other than the fact that he's better than a
Shares
Texas
more.
salad bar and has a decent set of pipes, say he's my guy.
You're a guy?
Probes more.
There's this mystery
Shares
man
more.
I've been chasing for the better part of a year. Cooks the purest meth that me or anyone else has ever seen. Goes by the name of Heisenberg. Yeah, pretty weird, huh? This guy was a man. He was a real character.
He seems unique.
Hey, let me show you something. Give it here.
Hank asks for the notebook to show him
Right
something
here
inside.
at the here at the top it says to WW, my star, my perfect silence. WW. I mean, who you figure that is, yeah? Woodrow Wilson? Willy Wonka? Walter White?
You got me.
Walt chooses to deflect.
WW.
Wait a minute. Let me
Hank
see
accepts
this
the answer. Walt asks for the notebook.
for a second,
Hank
because I
gives it
think
to
I
him.
remember. Ah, here. Yes.
When I heard the learned astronomer.
Learned.
He's an asshole
And
who
from
tries to
time to
distract him.
time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. It's a poem by Walt Whitman. Your WW.
You freaking brainiac. You freaking brainiac. I must have skipped that day in school or something. I don't know. I've been chasing my tail about that one, you know? I bet you're right.
Well, I'm glad it could be of help.
Yeah. Walt Whitman, huh?
So, you think this Gale person is your Heisenberg?
Yeah, I think so. God, I wanted to get this guy.
It looks like you did.
No, I mean, you know, me personally, you know. I wanted to be the one to slap the handcuffs on him, that kind of shit. Popeye Doyle waving the frog one.
If I recall, at least from the first French Connection, Popeye Doyle never actually caught him.
Yeah, I guess mean old Popeye, huh? Day late and dollar short.
What about the person who killed him?
APD's problem, not mine.
Any leads?
Well, my buddy Tim says they got some fingerprints they're trying to ID. Eyewitness person of interest, might get lucky there. And if somebody knows something, they'll track down the shooter eventually.
All right, guys. Who won the scene? Drop it in the chat. Andres? So you mentioning something there? Go ahead, unmute. Who won the scene? Yeah, Walter. Walter won the scene. He got to deflect. He got to find out what Hank knew, which is what he wanted going into the scene. Hank wanted to know a little bit more information, or see if Walt could get some information, verify some stuff. And yeah, Walt ultimately won the scene because he learned more. The next scene, Walt shows up panicked to Jesse's apartment. He's like, "Oh my God, open the door." The other thing, if you are a fan of Breaking Bad, this is something that is really interesting about Walter White's character. Some people are, if you're familiar with the concept of Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, right? That's when a character can endear themselves to you by doing something noble or heroic. But the inverse of that is something called kick the dog. And that's something that we, as an audience, have experienced with Walt White, where we can see in the very beginning that he's beaten down. The other reason why we as an audience root for Walt is not only because he is kicked down in the beginning and we want to see him reclaim his own authority, but in pretty much every scene that Walt is in, he loses, or he has fewer choices, but those choices are more powerful than the other characters. So he usually gets what he wants, even though he has fewer choices. So there are two things I want to point out about this scene in particular. One, the choice can move between characters, right? So in this scene, and probably the entire show, would have played out very differently if Walt decided not to give the notebook back, or Hank decided not to share more information. And when we think about how that applies to our content marketing, the choices we give our reader or viewer or listener on a micro level impact whether or not they're buying into our broader brand narratives, right? We want people to self-select as to whether or not our thing is for them. And this applies from everything for security software, what's your stance on the freedom versus security conversation, and how do you position that to customers, to retirement planning, to agencies, right? Do you want to be a strategic partner versus a production house? It's all about how we use setups with links or micro calls to actions that can only be paid off by clicking another article, giving them the option to see how far down the rabbit hole they want to go. Giving people very specific micro decisions or scene choices throughout the content is also what makes a significant part of a single piece engaging, and what gets people thinking and hanging on to every word. The other thing is that most of the time, the choice in a scene is framed as a question. Not only, or not always, but if you were to rewatch that scene, you'd see that there are 10 significant questions, which their answers and immediate responses make up the meat of the entire scene, right? Walt's questions are to find out how much Hank knows. Hank's questions are about confirming suspicions, right? There's that one scene where he goes Walter White in the middle. And part of that is because very, very early on, right? It's a long shot, but early on, he finds out that some of the initial products that were used when the introduction to Heisenberg, some of the initial products came from Walt's school. So it's a long shot, but why not just kind of test that waters out, right? As it relates to content marketing, I think this can work the same way. Now, I'm not an outliner by any means, but when we dive deep into a topic, I think it could be framed out with a handful of very thought-provoking questions. So we're going to go back to the blog post, right? While I like the revised intro that I put in together or initially earlier, it didn't start by presenting the reader with a choice, right? And instead, it tells the reader what it's about and why they should think it, right? It's about marketers, and it literally says it. It's about marketers making them work without losing their soul in the process, right? But if I were to refine this further, I do a better job at giving the reader a choice while setting up the dramatic question, right? So now I'm giving the choice, right? What kind of marketer do I want to be? How will you rethink these strategies? Or if you haven't started using them, can you afford not to? Now we've got really big choices that we want to bring to the reader's attention. And if you were wondering what's the dramatic choice or dramatic question, Robert McKee says that dramatic question subtly hints at the ending because it frames the conflict in a way that sets up the possible resolutions. He says that while the audience might not know how the story will end, the question itself suggests the range of possible outcomes, narrowing down your expectations without spoiling the conclusion. This is something like superhero movies are particularly, like, I love superhero movies, not because of like the movie itself, but because we know going into it, most of the time the hero is going to win. What we're actually caring about when we go into these is what choices are they going to make to get there, right? So that's something. And if you were at my last lightning lesson on intros, you'll know that I believe that every piece of B2B storytelling content should have a set of competing values and a philosophical conflict. Not always, but often enough, the philosophical question and the dramatic question, or the philosophical conflict and the dramatic question, are the same. And in this case, it's about progress versus tradition. And I think this is a much more powerful philosophical conflict as stated up front. All right. So this is important because when you present the reader with a choice, it's almost always in service to answering the dramatic question. In our case, if the dramatic question is, what kind of marketer do I want to be? It can be inferred that the answer is going to be some kind of hybrid, but depending on what kind of business or service you run, or audience you serve, it's okay if that's not the answer. Even though some kind of hybrid is where this piece is headed, if I were running a design firm, the answer will lean more towards tradition. Whereas if I were to run an AI platform of some kind, I might lean more towards progress, right? So we can move that in any different direction. And one of the things that I think about doing every now and again is just like in the scene in Breaking Bad, where a handful of important questions and choices act as the scaffolding of the piece. We can do the same thing with the rest of this post. These aren't questions for the sake of questions, right? And I see that in a lot of pieces where it's just a question that, you know, it doesn't move the story forward in any way. But in my mind, these questions should be related to the external, internal, and philosophical stakes of the piece. Also, this diagram is going to look familiar to anyone who was at my last lightning lesson, and as well as these questions are positioned where they are. If you don't know, I really recommend checking the lightning lessons on intros. Finally, some of these questions could be represented by someone in the cast of characters, like we have Jeremiah, and by the way of internal employees, subject matter experts, or some guy on the street. I don't really care. Some of these places we can edit even further by incorporating these questions. So here was the original rewrite right down here. But this isn't the only way to make your emails feeling more alive in 2025. I rewrote this one entirely. Right, so we've got Cynthia here. I rewrote on the back half here because I wanted to address the reader's potential skepticism and set them up to win the scene, which I felt was missing from the original rewrite. One of the ways I did this was, instead of saying, use these cool new toys, I gave them a choice to decide if it was right for them. So before you tack on a countdown timer or a live progress bar, ask yourself, is this adding value to my subscribers? Am I focusing on genuine engagement? Have I set up the right checks to make sure the automation stays human? Right. Now we're giving that choice. We're letting somebody decide for themselves, not just telling them and forcing the red pill down their throat. Right. Here's another one. This was the original. Right. Customize one of our free email templates with litmus tested live elements to create custom and personalized approach. Right. In this one, I reframed this. I cut some pieces out here too to make it fit more into the traditional camp. But I also gave, even though the reader won the last scene, I wanted in this scene for us to win the scene, the writer, by reframing it as would customizing one of our free email templates be a stopgap, right? So, and the reason too here, I also did a little bit more of a rewrite. I gave this as an option here too, because I know that a lot of content marketers would love to have their own dedicated designer, but it's not possible. So we want to finish that out with sort of the opposite approach, right? If you can't have an email designer, would this work as a stopgap? So there are a couple things there that are important to this particular thing. So I also wanted to plant the idea that their inbox is a source of inspiration. Do I expect them to check their inbox? No, absolutely not. But it was an intentional choice that plants the seed for a handful of individuals. Will they remember that it was me that said it? Also, no, probably not. But if they can create little micro checkpoints like this here, and in the quote, so they'll continue reading, I can give them an actual choice to off-ramp to another article or resource potentially. And they might not remember it now, but if I can keep them nodding their heads after 3 or 4 or 5 articles, with each one I increase my odds of becoming memorable and getting them to understand why my worldview is going to be valuable. Right? Let's see. Where are we? Oh, going backwards. That's where we're going. And then right here, I'm going to give this one a full rewrite. Right? So I'm going to do that for a few reasons. So lifecycle email supports retention and engagement for business sustainability, which is important for long-term success, especially if funding or growth feels a bit stinted. However, our research found that only 44% of marketings use lifecycle emails. Why is that? It's a combination of effort and attribution, right? I take issue with that. I rewrote it because from my own research with the State of Discontent report, the reason marketers aren't doing things like lifecycle emails, not because of a lack of effort, because they're simply not allowed to. So I wanted to acknowledge that. Second, and this is for the content theory alumni in the room, when I ask how much of a hero do you want to be, right? In that question, that's an intentional choice based on what we talked about in the degrees of motivation unit. This question would change based on what I know about how, generally speaking, my reader is motivated by. Third, and this is kind of the most important piece here, is I wanted to give the reader a real choice by offering them an off-ramp, right? If the here's how to do lifecycle email marketing was something they already know, they're instantly disengaged. But by including this link to the buy-in article, it creates a setup or an off-ramp that can only be paid off by going to a new page to help solve the problem that's more relevant to them. Right? This is one of those things where I think this is incredibly important. This is one of the biggest things that I disengage with a lot of content with, because I'm like rolling my eyes. Like, yes, I know how to do lifecycle email. That's not my problem. My problem is this other thing. So now I can give them an off-ramp. And let's see here. Is there anything anyone wants to talk about there? We've got one more section, and I promise it's a little bit quicker. No. Thank you, everybody, for hanging in there with me, by the way. I know we're a little bit over what we planned on, but I hope you're getting something out of this. Cool. Dynamic charges. So this is the last thing, right? The thing I hate the most about most content marketing is that it usually has a flat tone from beginning to end. Here's a thing, here's another thing, here's one more thing, now we end it. And the number one reason I think we disengage from B2B content versus all other forms of media is not because the subject matter is boring, but because the execution lacks so many of the qualities we find in popular media, which is primarily the story itself not moving, right? To paraphrase Robert McKee, right? A story is a series of value-charged events that build to a climax. Each scene must flip these values or the audience feels nothing is moving. Also, never let a scene end on the same value it began. Conflict must drive the charge from positive to negative or negative to positive to keep the story alive. Now let's have some fun. And I'm going to show you how this works on a macro and a micro level. And then we're going to get going. So on a macro level, at the end of season 3, after a long and stressful season, or at the end of season 4, rather, after a long and stressful season, Walt has successfully killed his primary antagonist, Gus Fring. And this is one of the last times that we see him. This is a positive charge, right? I won. Yay. The next time we see Walter, though, at the beginning of the 5th and final season, he looks incredibly disheveled and broken down. And we, as the audience, have no idea why. So it ends on a negative charge, right? Having each season turn from charge to charge is what gives us a sense of progress, because something is always happening. This has been so ingrained in how we receive stories that when the scene turns from positive to negative, our lizard brain says, what's going to happen next? And when the scene turns from negative to positive, it goes, how is this going to go wrong? But this also happens on an episode-by-episode level and a scene-by-scene level. So, for example, what we're going to watch is the first scene of the midpoint episode of the final season of Breaking Bad. In the final scene of the previous episode, Walt's partner, Mike, was about to leave the country to avoid getting arrested, so a positive charge. But after a heated conversation, Walt kills Mike, a negative charge. At the beginning of this episode, he's about to dispose of Mike's body, which is currently in the trunk of his car, holding on to that negative charge when Jesse, who has since broken up with Walt as a partner, enters the scene. Jesse wants to know if Mike got away. Walt wants to get back to disposing the body. Now, I want you to pay attention to 3 things before we play this. What are the choices being made? Who wins the scene? And for Walt, does the scene end on a positive charge or a negative charge?
It had to be done.
Okay.
All right.
I need to talk to you in private. So what's the story? You get to Mike?
Mm-hmm.
You get out safe?
He's gone.
All right. What about those 9 guys in jail? And they got no reason not to talk now. So what do we do?
We? Who's we? There is no we, Jesse. I'm the only vote left. And I'll handle it.
All right. Who won the scene? Drop it in the chat. Also, yep. What were the choices that were being made? It's a trickier one. Walter, kind of, but not decisively. Okay. So that's actually a really good point. Walter did, but in some of these types of choices are who wins the scene. There's the ironic who won the scene. Like, yes, Walter won, but was that a good win? Right? At what cost did that win come? We're going to actually talk about endings in the next lightning lesson. So next month will be about endings. And that's actually a really big one. Did the character get what they want, what they need? Some combination of both. And then if they got what they wanted, was it a good victory or a hollow victory? Right. And some of the choices that were being made in that scene too, Walter decided to lie to Jesse. He stonewalled him and he eventually kicked him out. Right. So Walter held all of the choice in that scene. And from my perspective, it ended on a kind of positive note for him. So that's how that happened at the beginning of the episode. Now, we talk about this on a scene-by-scene basis. This is how the episode ends.
Ooh, Schrader bro?
Yeah.
I vote yes. I second that.
No?
Well, there you go. It's unanimous.
All right. Well, who am I to fly in the face of public demand, right? Hey, come on. Anybody want anything? You want anything?
No, I'm good.
Yeah?
I'm good, thank you.
All right.
Does it look glossier?
Look at
I don't halo.
Got you,
How's she doing?
We made you.
Good. Yeah? Try not to put any of the sunscreen on her fingers.
To WW, my star, my perfect silence. WW. I mean, who you figure that is, yeah? Woodrow Wilson? Willy Wonka? Walter White?
You got me.
So what was set up at the beginning of season 4 was paid off at the midpoint of season 5. Significantly turned the story. Now Hank knows for certain that Walt is Heisenberg. So that's your setup and payoff. But then also the scene starts with them having a really positive experience at the pool. Everybody's having a nice time. they're feeling really happy with each other, to ending on the note that Walt has now been exposed, right? Positive to negative, negative to positive. That's how that works. And what we're going to see here, right, is the scale of charges. This is how it moves throughout the story. For the most part, the story is going to move from negative to positive or positive to negative. You want to avoid neutral at all costs, especially in your introduction. And occasionally you'll want to move from positive to double positive, or good to great, or negative to double negative, which is bad to worse. The idea is that the audience member, you're going to go, how are they going to get out of this? Again, so the scene ends on a negative charge, or how is this going to go wrong when the scene ends on a positive charge? Now, you may not realize this. This is actually something I did in the rewrites already, right? So we'll start here. Positive charge. We'll say it once again. We'll say it once. We'll say it once again. You need a dedicated email designer, right? Exclamation point. The very end, would customize one of our email templates. If you can't afford a designer, would customize one of our email templates. Be an okay stopgap, right? Kind of negative. You don't have an email designer. Is this something that you would necessarily want to do? Maybe, maybe not. And then we can see here, this goes from negative to double negative, positive to double positive. All right. The goal as I edit is to make sure these charges move up and down the ladder to align with how we're wired to receive stories. If I can, I try to avoid neutral as much as possible. And when there are opportunities to go from good to great or bad to worse, take them, right? Doing so signals to your reader that there will always be more to gain and more to lose. And when it's pulled off well, it can also act as a setup that can only be paid off by reading one more page, watching one more video, listening to one more lightning lesson, or taking content theory. So I promise you, whenever you watch your next TV show or movie, you will see these patterns everywhere. If something you're watching ever feels off or flat or boring, it's usually because they haven't made the stakes clear. They haven't created strong setups or payoffs. They haven't had their characters make strong, clear choices, so there's no clear winners and losers in the scene. And they haven't turned the charges or have stayed with them for way too long. To be clear, this is a lot of hard work. And if you don't have a foundation built on strong brand narratives, a deep understanding of your customers' wants and needs, and the market at large, even doing this stuff well means you're really just creating good fiction, right? Is it worth the effort? I believe it's essential if we want to change the perception of our practice from word slingers to strategic partners. But only you can decide for yourself. And if you think so, I'd like to invite you to check out Content Theory, where we'll explore the science, psychology, and philosophy behind high-performing content programs. Any questions? That was the goal. That was the goal. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, thank you so much for staying later. But I would love to answer any questions about this stuff. I know I throw a lot at you. But if you have anything that you'd like to talk about, that'd be great. Okay. Going once? Going twice?
Hi.
Hi. Gail.
Yeah. Hi,
It's good to
Thomas.
see you.
Yeah, hi, this is Ritinder. Can you hear me?
Oh, hello. Yes.
Yeah, so my question actually stems from the previous class we had about the intros and creating
Yes.
conflict. So I write about software, and I'm wondering how I can create a conflict that keeps my reader reading.
Sure. So,
Yeah.
sure. So give me a topic. This is the best way to workshop this.
All right, so I write about business intelligence, data tools. I work for Select Hub. We are a technology selection management
Yes.
consultancy, so we are trying to sell our managed services.
Yes, Zach was
And
actually in Content Theory.
oh yeah, he's the best.
Yes.
Yeah. So and he has always great things to say about you.
Oh, thank you.
You shared the link for this for us to join, and so that's why I'm here. And I was here in the last class, so I'm gaining a lot of information. Thank you so much. It's been very enriching, and I wondered at the end of that class also, and I'm wondering still. I'm trying to improve on this scale as how I can create a conflict when I'm writing about something which is not fiction, which is so
Right.
dry, which is about software.
Right.
So
Okay. So you guys, and just to give everybody else some context here too. So Select Hub does primarily buyer's guides for different softwares. And I think that's important when we start to look at trade-offs, right? That's the big thing that I would look at. When we look at the primary value proposition of whatever software it is, it's the trade-off of doing that. So when we talked about in the last lightning lesson, in the example that was there, was actually HubSpot versus Pipedrive, right? And the trade-off from HubSpot versus Pipedrive, and this is CRM platforms. If I mean, I assume everybody here is familiar with HubSpot, but HubSpot is the established company. They have tons of features, and it's great. If you have all this need to have all the features, fantastic, right? Versus Pipedrive, which is a little bit more simplified. It's for smaller businesses, and it's not as expensive. So the conflict in there is if somebody's in evaluation mode, that's what the conflict is and the question too is like, what kind of software is right for my type of business, right? And the trade-off, the conflict there is first it's tradition versus or traditional software versus incumbent software, right? So new upstarts versus the ones that are established already. But the second conflict there would be features versus streamline, right? Minimalist versus maximalist. And what I would do in a piece like that, if I were to do something that had those competing values with each other, would consistently, right? And buyer's guides are particularly, this is particularly important for buyer's guides, is consistently put those choices in there, right? Those different questions that we're talking about for the scaffolding of the piece, of asking the reader what is right for them, right? And say if it's something, someone mentioned this on the Q&A part of the last one too, they're like, well, I sell security software. And the philosophical or the conflict there would be freedom of information versus security, right? Freedom versus security. That's a big set of competing values that show up all the time. And what I would explore in a piece like that, especially if you wanted to make them a little bit more personalized, is what kind of IT security person do I want to be, right? And I would frame the different options that a security software might have as, you can lock it down entirely. You can give your employees choices. Like it doesn't have to be fully locked down, or this is a totally locked down thing. So what kind of options do you want to give for your employees? But also realize the trade-off on how you might be perceived if you go like a fully locked down route, right? So does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, we do a lot more than buyer's guide. So what you're saying will fit my versus articles. We write words versus articles where we compare two products.
Yeah.
We also have a lot of best of articles. So I'm guessing something. What you're saying is it should stem from my knowledge from my research about whom the tool fits, and then to compare the two to present it to my reader so that I can tell them, okay, maybe you're a small business, so maybe this works for you, but this doesn't.
Yeah. We do have a few more questions that I want to be able to take. So let's take that
Yeah.
offline. Please feel free to email me
Yeah.
because I do have some thoughts on this, but I want to make sure that we
Sure.
get to everyone because I
Thank
think
you.
that's really important.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Gail says here, have you ever used the original and the rewrite to determine who your audience is? That's a hard one because the I will do consistent outreach. I do my best to do consistent outreach. I mean, Gail, you and I have talked, right? I try my best to do consistent outreach to either people who I feel like might be in my target market or to people who are already existing customers. And generally speaking, if I'm working with somebody who is creating a piece for me, I'll relay as much of that information upfront as possible. But especially in the early days of creating a content program, it is totally possible to experiment with that to find that signal out there in the market. Now, to be absolutely clear, this is something that we cover in layer 2 of the 8-layer market research process of extracting that type of information from existing customers or from cold outreach type customers, so you can find those similarities with the people who you might feel like are in your target market. So I think it really has to start there. It really has to start with real conversations with people and being able to pull out those types of insights as to what they value, what they fear, and what their overall strategies for success are. And but it is a refinement process after that. I do not try to go in blind because you're just throwing darts at the wall. And you might, more importantly, you might attract the wrong audience. There have been plenty of projects that I've put together where I thought I was doing something cool. I thought I was attracting the right type of audience just by creating without doing the research really, specifically to the IPs that I was creating. And it attracted the entirely wrong group of people with no buying power, right? So I think it's incredibly important to do that research consistently to make sure that it aligns with that. Does that make sense? You can hop on audio there, Gail. Okay. All right. I'm going to move on. Why do you think some B2B marketers often create single choice content instead of offering another way, an additional option or path? Because they don't know. I think that's the biggest part, is that they just don't know. They're not looking at the full experience of that particular person. There hasn't been a lot of conversation with customers or people that might be in market. And therefore don't know what the options are available. I think a lot of freelance writers in particular are just given assignments and aren't taking that extra step to talk to real people. And a big thing that I hear from folks all the time too is like, I'm not allowed to talk to customers. I think that's kind of a cop out, right? And the reason I say that is because, to go back to stuff I talk about in content theory, we've got the 8-layer market research process. And if you're not able to talk to customers directly, Reddit is a great place to find out the different choices that people have available to them and find out what types of, like, what opinions people have. And there's no shortage of finding out what options people have there. So I think part of that is the effort, and I think part of that is a mindset shift. I think that's what the big thing is, why there's only a single option that's given. Gail, I'm sorry to hear that's not working. Does that check out for you? There, Manuel, are you still here? Yeah. Okay. If you want to ask any follow-up questions there too on that, please feel free to unmute. All right, cool. Okay, cool. Yeah, is there anything else you wanted to talk about on that, or does that feel pretty good to you? Okay, yeah. You said thank you. Okay, cool. If there are no other questions that you would like to talk about publicly, that's fine. Feel free to send me an email at tommy@thecontentstudio.com. And if you would like to chat further, go ahead there. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking the additional time today. That means a lot. And I hope to see you soon.